Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to start off with a short. I put a link in the description for you of a song that encompasses the regulatory agency's desperation for a renaissance. I'm just going to play the first part of that. You can go listen to it. There's a link in the description after. And I'll be right back.
Those who decide told us there was no alternative. They said the demand was fixed. They said reliability needs scale, and scale won't wait. They said firm power, constant power. Said the future needs it now. They called it a renaissance. Said the decision was already made. They said delay was danger. They said review was over. This is how the nuclear Overton window began to narrow.
We got a good show for you tonight.
Those who decide talked about solutions, talked about schedules, but not about keeping what remains when the generation ends. They talked about storage for now, they talked about fixes ahead. They said the process was technical, not ours. They didn't talk about the horizon, they didn't name who stays accountable. The nuclear Overton window never held a long term.
We're just going to do the show a little early. There's links in the description. It's a lovely song with an incredibly important story.
Consent became friction, so it was pushed aside. The nuclear Overton window moved again from open debate to settled.
Yeah, there is no nuclear renaissance. That's the part they forget to tell you. Right, there's all this propaganda out there, and the industry is losing gigawatts. It has no ability to replace and catch up again. Excuse me, a little try. We got some legacy headlines for you to get through tonight. A few other. We got a significant cyclone has struck Madagascar, out at the tip of Africa. The winds were 167 miles per hour gust. We don't have, like, the infrastructure in Africa is pretty inferior. That's being polite. So there's around 50,000 houses significantly damaged, 20,000 destroyed at least. They haven't got that tally in yet. And these cyclones and hurricanes and typhoons, the poll tonight is to acknowledge what everybody that's here regularly already knows. And to those who haven't been here before, welcome. Hang around. It's a good show. Are cyclones, hurricanes, and typhoons significantly more powerful worldwide post-Fukushima? And there can only be one answer for that. And that is a terrifying statement. That person died that day, for sure. The green you see around them. And the fact that they're in a paper suit means they're not in the academic community, because you wouldn't go there, let alone wear a paper suit at a nuclear meltdown site. The regions, that green stuff you're looking at, is meant to bind with particles of fuel, because the particles are splitting atoms. So each particle is actually splitting atoms. It's a perpetual machine for millions of years, each atom. And this stuff is catastrophic to everything with replicating cells. I'm just going to I'm just going to give you an intro to Fukushima and nuclear kind of at the same time. It's discovered that human kidneys are 50 times less efficient than the animal kidneys that remove plutonium. And the reason that's important is because all the animals, this case here was 144 dogs, this United States Navy Research Institute, New Mexico, Loveless Respiratory Research Institute. All the dogs died of multiple tumors from a single exposure of plutonium. And there was an awful amount of plutonium released at Fukushima. This is an awful amount. And this is true for every species. But the biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel rod is not plutonium or iodine or cesiums. It's actually a curium isotopes. And curium, that's why we call the nuclear meltdown, the fuel when it melts down, we call it a curium. And the curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And curium isotopes being the biggest byproduct. Forget about the fact that it's a significant fraction of the alphas, which goes in your bone and produces radioactive stem cells. Imagine your kids and your pets and all the species and all the people that are being born post-Fukushima are producing radioactive stem cells. Your body's not designed to function on that stuff. And so there's going to be hell to pay through the development. And the same is true then, because you can't have an enormous amount of, say, alphas or betas without having an enormous amount of gammas, for instance. And gammas will end up all over your muscles and your heart, your bones, your bones, but also in your thyroid and your other glands. So that means that all the species, and you and your friends and families and loved ones, but all the young children that takes 20 years to develop, are producing radioactive hormones and radioactive stem cells for throughout the gestation of all the species on top of that. That study was also by Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, which is United States Navy. They specialize in killing beagle dogs and beagle puppies with anthropogenic man-made radiation. So if none of the animals survive the experiments, what do you think you will? The tsunami ran right through the site. A worst case scenario. There was 4 reactors, and on the same street was a common spent fuel pool. And this is where a lot of older fuel assemblies, reactor cores, were stored. And it's common practice to have at least double the inventories in the pools because they don't have a repository anywhere on the planet. And Japan is certainly not even trying. Global, this story here from 24, when I was trying to find how much was produced in 2025. So this is just solar power. We're not counting wind and everything else, right? So this year alone, if you're doing a comparison of what we produced in 2025 and 2024, the total amount of gigawatts worldwide is 3,365 gigawatts of power being produced at any given time on the planet. And so there was almost 1,000 between 2020. Let me see. So for when it comes to nuclear, the total is 376 gigawatts. It's less than that now. That was 2025. And so this year, the solar alone and say wind, or for 2025, we're expecting around 1,000 gigawatts of power. Now, for some reason, we're not pursuing geothermal, which is a fatal mistake. And so the total amount of gigawatts worldwide is, we produced almost 1/3 of that in 12 months of just renewables. So that song that we started off with, and then the rest of that story is that there is no nuclear renaissance, right? And the point of all of that is we produced almost 1/3 of the entire planet's consumption in just a 12-month period. Now, we're not trying. We're not applying. We're throwing all our money at a unicorn like fusion and small modular reactors. They don't exist. It's a wonderful story. It's the same story as Spider-Man and the Hulk. It's a total fiction created to lull you into complacency. A bit rusty. I took a spill a couple of weeks ago, so that's why I've been away. I hurt myself pretty darn good. If I didn't do a show tonight, I might not be doing one next week, so just to suck it up and do a show is the best thing to do. One Fukushima may destroy the whole country. Collapse of a whole country is possible. So think about that statement then. Why would you want nuclear power in your country? And the small modular reactor fables, let's say it did come to fruition, it's going to produce, what's the numbers? We've covered it extensively. Around 5 times more high-level radioactive waste, like fuel, and 30 times more of intermediate-level waste, which is catastrophic amounts we're talking about. But because when you compare the fuel rods to other types of radiation, there's no comparison because it's lethal doses immediately from the fuel rods. The other stuff is lethal, but it takes a few years. And we're talking about lethal through heart attacks, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia, heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, which brings a whole host of illness and diseases, and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries because of that concoction, that elixir. So when you look at this model here, it's only based on 20 days. It's based on an incomplete amount of emissions. When you talk about the so-called Fukushima 50s, which is meant to be, allegedly was retired employees, so to speak. These people are not retired employees. These are people who don't know anything about the nuclear industry whatsoever, were jacked off the streets, promised a lot of money for a few hours' work, an impossible amount of money, were liquored up and given whatever their flavored drugs were, and given paper suits, which was a death sentence for these people. These people dies constantly, and we have acknowledgement of that happening through different monasteries that their ashes have been dropped off at. So they incinerate most likely in an experiment. On top of that, so this regions is what you're looking at, the green, the ironic and iconic green. It's unconscionable that people were put in this position so the nuclear industry can pretend that it has a half a dozen redeeming qualities. It doesn't actually. Another issue was spraying salt water. It didn't matter which kind of water you used. Any kind of water was catastrophic. You're producing radioactive particulates by doing it. Because the material, the water, is going to atomize an aerosol and become ionized and radiated, which is a weapon against everything with replicating cells on the planet. And that fine particulate, microscopic particulates, don't underestimate that, because you put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it. But a single one of them is pulsing energy 600 feet every second, for instance, which is cesium-137. There's 1,000 different isotopes, and they all have these types of properties. So this wrecks the chromosomes, the cells, the DNA, etc., of all the species and plants and flora and fauna. This is a real issue. Now, peroxide, this is what they're alluding to with this. They're talking about formed by seawater. When you do look at all the studies of it, the best way to describe it is a sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyball. It's the sulfur is liberated from the salt water. That's able to ingest uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, etc., etc. And that is very hot particles now. It's very mobile. It doesn't need jet streams to mobilize around the entire planet. Well, none of it does. But more so when you're talking about super hot particles. Now, neptunium-239, notice how intense that particular plume is. That's based on 20 days of radioactive fallout from Japan. And neptunium-239 decays to plutonium-239 in just 2.5 days. So every 2.5 days, there's that plume. Now, after 20 days, of course, the majority of the plume is plutonium. There's 10 decay cycles. So all of neptunium, for instance, if it had stopped at this point, but what you're looking at is a continuous plume covering the entire planet. Wrap your mind around that statement. Think about a snowstorm that's continuous and wrapped around the entire planet. Think about a snowstorm from 36 reactor cores. At the top of each of these flimsy buildings was around 8 reactor cores stored in the fuel pools. Decades of reactor cores. And it could be up to 15 reactor cores at the top of each of these particular designs. And the designs were never meant to permanently store it there. There was always the false promise that they were going to have a repository to isolate this from humanity. Hello? That's the trolls again. I'm sorry about that. My apologies. That might be a mistake for them to do that to me. Sorry. I just... Terrible, terrible, hateful people, right? Radioactive material from the reactors is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Have a look at that. So that's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Think of a plume, think of a snowstorm that starts in Japan, for instance, and 20 days later, the whole planet is covered in a snowstorm. Now, appreciate the fact that this snowstorm doesn't melt, and it never goes away, and it never stops coming out. And a lot of it is in particulates, and they are splitting atoms. So when you're talking about a material that is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison, and an invisible snowstorm of multiple isotopes, and everything has everything attacks everything with replicating cells, which is what our planet thrives upon, right? Cesium-137 immediately damages the heart muscles. So are you seeing a spike in heart attacks? I'm just trying to introduce you before I take you through some legacy headlines of Fukushima to give you even deeper insight that we probably haven't. In fact, I know we haven't covered on this site. These we have. What I'm doing now is meant to break that cycle of complacency. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 atoms a kilogram. So when you see a Becquerel, think of that as an atom that pulses energy. That pulse of energy is the Becquerel. So in order to have the Becquerel, you have to have an atom, right? So they hide that fact by describing it as 50 becquerels a kilogram, when it's 50 atoms producing 50 becquerels a kilogram of just cesium. And you can't just have cesium. Irreversible heart damage, and it's irreversible lesions to the adult's organs and horses and cows and mammals and animals. 50 atoms a kilogram, and humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organ. Ask your doctor the next time you're there, what does irreversible lesions to all of your vital organs mean to your health? and you're going to get a pretty rough answer. Extreme increase in mortality caused by cardiac diseases, and the data might give the creeps to somebody. I didn't have the rest of the numbers there for that, but it was around 14,000 extra deaths of heart attacks just in a single month compared to any other year in that particular month, right, post-Fukushima. So when you're talking about 35.8% of the children with thyroid tumors that are around 2 centimeters, the thyroid tumor, thyroids are only about 2 by 3 centimeters for a child. So the tumor is as big as their thyroid. So, now, it used to be 1 in a million. So then you have to consider that this could be 358,000 out of a million. And then to put that into perspective, ignoring that, in the first year there was 865,000 extra cancers. And that not everybody got health care, not everybody was diagnosed, right? And then, of course, this stuff covered the entire planet. You got 1,000,000 atoms of xenon-133, you got 20 million atoms of iodine-131. And in order for each one of these to have that particular designation and attribute, they have to pulse energy at the speed of light every second. So there's 20 million pulses of light every second per liter of your drinking water or your hot tub water or your shower or your laundry or your dishes. You're going to use more than a liter of water to do your dishes, right? And that same liter is 220 million atoms of iodine-129. They say it doesn't pulse energy very far, but your body is full of life. It's just one great big vessel for life, right? And so in proximity, close proximity, this stuff is pulsing energy at the speed of light for 15 million years. You're still going to destroy your chromosomes, your DNA, your cells. It's not like cesium-137 that'll do it from 600 feet, but because you're talking about so much, with such longevity, you're going to face an extinction event anyway. Think about how bad Tokyo, 240 kilometers away, is. 500 trillion atoms a kilogram, significant consequences. But think about the fact that this covered the entire planet. All the oceans were covered immediately. This study is based on 954 days. This is 2013. Radiation levels in the United States West Coast spiked to over 1 million times normal. This was cesium-137, which we talked quite a bit about earlier, at 1 million to 10 million times. So 1 million to 10 million times, this is 20 days in. This model stops at 31 days. I got it on a cycle now where it'll go from 20 days to 31 days over and over. Each atom in this snowstorm pulses energy 600 feet every second. And now this was based upon the French government of a spike. This is not a projection. This is not an opinion. It's not a conjecture. This is a spike. This is a detection. This is an assault upon every species. Xenon-133 in Washington was found at over 450,000 times above detection levels, persisted for weeks. It's got a short half-life, and that's very significant that it persisted for weeks. That they're all in the same plume, right? All this stuff, and that's the enormous amount I just showed you, are in the same plume. So don't think that this might happen or could happen, or this did happen. This has happened. And this has been going on from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide every day on top of that. But Japan was unique. It was an event. And that's why we're seeing catastrophic weather phenomenons. And that's what I'm trying to point out tonight. Are cyclones and hurricanes and typhoons significantly more powerful worldwide since Fukushima? And then the trolls, you heard them on the phone earlier, and they're managed to denigrate the poll, but everybody knows this is true. This is not. I don't have opinions on this stuff. I have facts, and my assertions are based upon facts, and I do my best, and I'm only human, provide as much documentation to support my assertions, which I believe strongly is an overwhelming amount. It's an incontestable amount. Officials sharply raised radiation levels for residents to get the iodine pills after the meltdown, 75 times higher than the traitors WHO recommended for children. These are traitors, these people. The WHO and the so-called officials. These are not official murderers. Officially crimes against humanity. When the Tokyo water was declared originally unsafe for infants, it was because of radiation. So they knew this would be fatal to the nuclear industry. Worldwide panicked, and so they redacted it. It happened. Obviously, it happened. And it was way worse than even what they were asserting. They admit the meltdown multiple years later. Let's get down to the recent stories. Tokyo government finds iodine-131 levels up to quadruple the cesium levels in the water reclamation centers. Well, you've seen that in North America, it was 20 million atoms per liter. Can you imagine how bad Japan was? The government says 1,500 tons of highly radioactive sludge may end up as soil for gardening. 50,000 tons. This was July 2011, so March, April, May, June, July. There was 50,000 tons in just this one area. 5 prefectures. 50,000 tons in 5 prefectures. 50,000 tons in 5 prefectures. So let me go backwards. So the water treatment facilities meant you can't get rid of the sediment from the water filtration facilities. How do you get rid of? How can you drink that water? You can't. Then the water lines are contaminated, just like a lead-contaminated lead line. All your water lines should have been dug up and replaced, minimum, because the initial pulse event of 36 reactor cores melting down in 4 buildings with 8 fuel pools. So your garbage is too radioactive to get rid of. Your sewage is too radioactive to get rid of. Your water reclamation sediments is too radioactive to get rid of. The ashes from the incinerators. The air samples are 270 times more contaminated with cesium-137 and global weapons follow peak. 10 and 12 sewage plants are positive for high levels of radioactive material. Radiation around none of these are my opinions. I'm showing you the evidence on the screen, right? I'm providing you that evidence on the screen. I'm not. So, when people call me a scammer or says this or says that, that's because they can't beat the truth, the facts that I'm providing you. And so their only solution is to attack me, right? Highly radioactive sewage found 30-plus miles from Fukushima. So I'm just trying to establish there is a lot of documentation showing that this was a catastrophic event. There was 12 million cents for Twitter. Just for burning in one city. So that's around 54,000 US dollars. Easy money for Twitter, right? Okay. We'll get after it here right now. I want to quantify my assertions. There was a lot of reactors at the top of the buildings. I got a ways to go before it gets back up to speed. So this is a perfect night because I don't have to think about it till Sunday, right? That gives me a few more days to hopefully... Comparisons with x-rays and CAT scans are meaningless. And when you inhale in the particles, and so when you've seen the stuff I showed you earlier, hopefully now, right, it's 1 billion times more toxic than industrial poison, and comparisons with x-rays and CAT scans are meaningless. So this is Dr. or Professor, well, he's doctor, he's Professor, they'll introduce him here. He's going to talk about, this was on the 16th, day 5, and he's going to talk about how much inventories were at the top of reactor 4. Now remember, there's 4 of these reactors lost their inventories at the one time. That's reactor 4. Right alongside of it was reactor 3. So let me just play this clip. I'll be right back.
And if, in terms of what we know about the capacity, about how many fuel rods would likely be inside that reactor, what sort of quantity are we talking about radioactivity?
I've heard different numbers, ranging from 2 to 15 reactor cores worth. No, 2 to about 8 reactor cores worth.
So if it can't be controlled, that's worst case scenario, 8 reactors worth of radioactivity.
Right. Right.
And it would be released into the atmosphere.
Radioactivity. By the way, the fact that this has happened at unit number 4 is understandable and is consistent with the theory that it really did dry out, because the fuel from the unit number 4 was most recently discharged, and therefore was the hottest, and therefore the water would have boiled off more rapidly.
So when you look at the picture of reactor 4, which is to your right, behind me whenever it gets here, look at the guts hanging out at the bottom of the building, which meant the explosion was so enormous that it ejected everything not only out of the building, but down through the building and then out of the building. Reactor 3. So the fuel pools are at the very top. I can't stop doing that. The very top of the building. Right, there's 4 of them right alongside of each other. So if any of them blow up. Now remember, she says so there's 8 to 15 reactor cores at the top of the buildings. And how many buildings do you count? That's 4, right? So that's 36 reactor cores if we lowball it. Now, number 4, they pretended, I'm not going to play the video, we're going to jump into some stories just to try to get through something tonight. And he picked up 30 million one-ton bags. So clearly there's a lot got out. And 30 million one-ton bags, if you take a one-ton bag and put it in the back of a one-ton pickup truck, that's 30 million one-ton pickup trucks. That's 6 rows of traffic around the entire planet, bumper to bumper. These people died that day. And like, how arrogant to call it dust. How shameful, and how... And this is from TEPCO's website. This was on the 15th of March. So there was no way to survive with just one of these buildings melting down, but with 9 reactor cores in each building melting down. These are gamma shines and neutron bursts and x-rays and everything else. Plus you got to realize the inventory was dropped all over the site. You're talking about incredible inventory. So the media came out and pretended, this is just a fraction of them, that they're at the top of the building to the left that doesn't even exist. The food was banned all the way, including Tokyo, by 55 countries. But they, because each administration changes every 3 or 4 years worldwide, they slowly removed the restrictions in the majority of the countries. So they built these contraptions over the reactors and then pretended that they were at the top of the buildings. And the reason they're doing it because it's so catastrophic. And it's catastrophic to all species. And as you noticed, if you looked in my live streams in the last 8 shows or so, we covered nothing but emaciated whales. It's hard to comprehend how much I actually have here I haven't got to yet, that we haven't shared on this site. It's a stunning amount, and I would still be doing shows on that if I didn't have a catastrophic slip from a height that really landed on my spine, right, and on the edge of the steps. It was rough. Hopefully that part is now over with, but I just got to be careful that I've recovered, right? I got till the summer now, or the spring anyway, hopefully to recover. Radiation traces found in Japanese baby formula. Radiation traces, this is Canadian broadcasting media, government media, were 31 becquerels per kilogram of cesium-134, 137, which is below the current 200 atoms per kilogram set for milk. I mean, this is an absurd statement to suggest that 2 is safe, 2 atoms, let alone 200. Not all food samples are monitored for radiation, and readings have been voluntarily reported by the manufacturers. So if the food is not sampled, there's no government institutions sampling it. And that's why the trolls were coming after me earlier. And that there had to be voluntarily reported, so the manufacturer got they're over the limit, they're going to just say, well, don't tell them it's this much, tell them it's that much. They just don't care. And profit and corporate personhood takes precedence over safety. Flights from Tokyo trigger radiation alarms in Chicago and Dallas. Fuel rods in reactor 4, 5, and 6 are exposed. Think about that statement, folks. And 4 reactor units have core damage, according to the evilest organization on the planet, IAEA. So here they are, updated, 11:55. The fuel rods in reactor 4, 5, and 6 are exposed. If you expose the fuel rod, it denigrates. If it's exposed to oxygen for a few minutes, it'll actually catch fire. The cladding is made of zirconium. Zirconium reacts violently with oxygen. And they need a lot of water over them, or they start breaking down, which allows you to release an enormous amount of radiation without the detonations. So the explosions were the evidence of the nuclear meltdown itself. They were caused by pressure, not hydrogen. Hydrogen, of course, was building up there, but the explosion was caused by pressure. The reactors were pressurized vessels, over 1,000 pounds per square inch. They had no cooling. They need 6,450,000 one-ton pickup trucks of water every day. 6,450,000 one-ton pickup trucks of water with 1,000 liters each. So the pressure builds up because it's not cooling. There's an enormous amount of temperature because the chain reaction is perpetual, it's forever. It doesn't need oxygen to continue. And so this was Noah's model based on 40 days, which didn't use the inventories. This was a German Institute's model based on 954 days. This was a Chinese model, CC-134, 137, for instance. So there's so much evidence not evidence, but is a better word, is documentation. Yes, it's evidence, but it's documentation. It's unshakable, unassailable documentation. And so I'm weaponizing everybody with the information so nobody can beat you in a debate or a conversation if you're capturing this stuff. Take screen captures of all of this and keep your own independent files of it. It's so important that you have copies of all that. Don't just rely upon videos. I'm streaming in 1080, and so that's more than clear enough to be able to take a screen capture and print it out. And what you should really do, what I used to do a long time ago, was I would take a lot of these awful stories and I would screen capture it, and I would go to doctors' offices and drop off a whole bunch stapled together like a little book, and just leave it in the waiting room for people, random people to read. I gotta start doing that again. TEPCO began coating seafloors with cement mixture. What does that tell you? It tells you that this is nowhere close to being accurate. It was infinitely worse than that. Well, the whole planet got buried in radioactive fallout, so all the water was contaminated immediately. All right, here we go. We're almost ready. 20,000 excess U.S. deaths after Fukushima, not 14,000. Janet Sherman, she died about 2 years ago, I believe. But they showed an effect, right? They were looking for a discrepancy, more deaths by heart attacks and stuff like that, and that's what they found. And they knew they would find it. All right, here we go. I think, anyway, let's try it. The troubled past of Fukushima had a stricken nuclear plant failed safety checks and crammed its buildings with more uranium than they could stand. So this is day 10 of Fukushima event. Japan's stricken nuclear plant had one of the country's worst safety records. It was crammed with more uranium than was designed to hold. That's because you don't have a repository. And American engineers who masterminded the building had not intended the spent fuel to be housed inside the flimsy shells of the reactor buildings. All of those designs, though, have that particular attribute. Flimsy shells. And so that's the picture they're showing you after that sentence, when you can see the top of the picture right here. So when you look at this picture, every academic in the nuclear industry, every professor in the nuclear industry, every second, third, fourth year student knew the reactor core and the fuel pools were gone. They absolutely unequivocally, and none of them have ever, well, that's a lie. There is a couple of people originally had spoken out, but they went dark. A suicide squad mans Japan's nuclear plants. When that happens, you can't do anything. There's no good manning it because that's is not only suicide, it's stupid suicide. There's nothing stoic or heroic about that. Suicide squad mans Japan's nuclear plants. This was meant to give a false impression that the Japanese had any kind of control whatsoever. And guarantee if they had any kind of control, TEPCO wouldn't exist. They would have got rid of them right away. TEPCO's their fall guy, right? Let's keep it rolling here. Personnel attempting to cool down Japan's stricken Fukushima nuclear plant have been dubbed a suicide squad, with their families accepting their fate like a death sentence. And they show you these pictures, very grainy pictures. They call the team Kashiti, meaning a unit that expects to die. Well, it's not expecting it. If you're going anywhere near that Medusa right there, you're going to die. And these were grainy satellite pictures at the time. And I was zooming in trying to get some context. I didn't do a very good job, apparently. There have been explosions. What was the date on that? March the 18th. So all the reactors have exploded. All the fuel pools have already lost their inventories, which is 30 years of reactor cores. And they're storing about, what they're producing, each reactor is producing about 5.5 or more reactor cores in the fuel pools each decade. They're about over 3 decades old at that time. Reactor 4 and the reason Reactor 3 cooked off like that was because it was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. So this is very high, nasty, and you can't destroy the material by explosions or by incinerators or nitrous acid or anything else. They're just going to liberate it in the worst possible formula into the environment. Experts were working around the clock to cool the reactors, and the giant helicopters have been used to dump water over them. 20 people have been confirmed to have suffered from radiation exposure. But the reality of it was, on the 18th, when that story came out, the buildings would have looked like that. In other words, there was no inventories there to salvage, right? If there was people actually sent in, they were sacrificed for a media operation, right? A public relations stunt. March the 18th, the entire inventories were gone. And so these stories have false bravado. Workers, not an engineer or a scientist or an academic, or a worker's daughter told my father, says he accepted his fate much like a death sentence. Well, that would have been a homeless person. It certainly wouldn't be an academic or anybody who knew what going in and facing Medusas would have meant, right? Because they would have said, well, it's pointless going there, we're just going to die. Let's go, if I'm going to sacrifice my life, at least do it for something that has meaning. Not for a photo op so the media can pretend that the nuclear industry is working. Rotating in a team of 50, they entered the radiation hotspots for 15 minutes at a time. So what were you going to do at a nuclear meltdown? What do you mean limit your time? It's delusional to suggest somebody was limiting their time, right? Another worker sent a message to his wife that said, please continue to live well, I cannot be home for a while. So this was just yellow journalism meant to invoke there's extreme snow in Japan, is right. It's, if you have your time is 6 feet of snow or something. So there's no way to evacuate people during these consistently, if you got a bunch of people trying to escape a radioactive wasteland and in 6 feet of snow, it's pretty easy to appreciate there's going to be a lot of accidents, right? And anybody gets stuck in the snow, everybody's stuck in that snow. So you can't evacuate a city where the snow is going to be falling and can't guarantee they can be evacuated. Studying Japan's broadcast, and that the snow, of course, will liberate a lot of the radiation back into the environment. It'll wash the emissions, the pollen, the plants, the trees, the foliage that didn't break down because you killed the bacteria and the fungus and the biota. That'll get washed out into the Pacific where it'll do harm for millions of years. There's so many horrifying attributes to radioactive fallout that the world needs desperately to get it together and wake up. Let's have a conversation before the nuclear industry is coasting, desperate that the world doesn't look at Fukushima, and that's where everybody needs to look. That's your precedence. Citing Japan's broadcaster, there's 7 military fire trucks sprayed 50 tons of water on the fuel storage pool of reactor number 3 on Friday. Well, the fuel storage pool for reactor 3 was at the top of the building. And as you can see, this is reactor 3 right there. There's no top to that building. It ejected the reactor cores and the fuel pools straight out of the building. It's reactor 3. And the fuel pools should be at the top of the buildings, not the bottom of the buildings, right? So it's gone. So spraying 50 tons of water. These fire trucks, of course, if you look at the original pictures that were released by TEPCO, for instance, There was no way fire trucks can get in proximity to it. And just bear with me. I actually did, on my thumbnail was a picture of a fire truck. It was on the seaside of the turbine buildings. The turbine buildings are on the ocean side. Just bear with me. I never used a thumbnail yet because it was kind of a 3-part show tonight that I had to import. No, and I'm not going to get through it all, but so these fire trucks, like the reactors need 4,500 tons each a minute. That's reactor 3, by the way. And the fuel pools are already gone. You can't spray water on a fuel pool that doesn't exist. Right? The evidence of that was overwhelmingly, and 50 tons is irrelevant. 7 military fire trucks. Steam was rising from the damaged building. This is not steam, it's lethal doses of the inventories melting and consuming everything around it and ionizing and radiating it and releasing it as fine radioactive particulates. An indication that the water was reaching the overheating fuel. So they're talking about reactor 3. You need 4,500 of these to equal what you need for a minute of these fire trucks. In fact, their total actually is around 300 tons per day. An indication that the water was reaching the overheating fuel is absurd because the building didn't even exist on the 18th. Around 30 Tokyo Fire Department, not nuclear academics, nuclear companies, or nuclear businesses, or nuclear universities, or employees from other nuclear power plants, but the fire department. Now, the fire department don't know what a nuclear meltdown is. So why would anybody expect them to be the right people for the job, right? Yeah, they got the right equipment, but they're not the right people. They don't know where to spray it. Right? To them, it's a fire, but this is not a fire. This is a nuclear meltdown. We're also expected to spray reactor number 1. Now, some of the stuff they're talking about, the reactors need water. It has to go into a pressurized system at over 1,000 pounds per square inch. These fire trucks don't produce that kind of pressure, so there's no way to introduce the water into the pressurized vessel, which is overpressurized, right? They all exploded because they overheated and they're already at a very high pound per square inch. And that temperature rises till the containment explodes, and that's what these explosions were. Right? These are all categorized as hydrogen explosions, but hydrogen is a very flammable. Right? So that key signature would have been evident throughout the whole. And this was a pressurized explosions. Experts have said the levels of radiation in Tokyo were not harmful to human health. On the 18th, it was 270 times what it was from global weapons fallout peak from the nuclear war they had. They told you it was nuclear testing. It's the same nuclear weapon, so it's the same radioactive fallout. That's nuclear war. Calling it anything different is just not being rational and being dishonest. U.S. boost radiation sniffing systems. They show you these plumes here. March the 10th, is it? Or March the 18th or something. Can't quite pick it out. Looks like March the 19th. I tilt my glasses because I got progressive glasses, right? Looks like the March the 16th is Story. So that projection was basically, I think, well, it's a 1, so it's probably a 19 or something. Looks like the top part of it was bigger than not necessarily, I guess. Anyway, A RadNet radiation monitor is seen on the roof of the Bay Area Air Quality District's office in San Francisco. So back in these days, the cover story, they had one there, but they didn't roll it out yet. They didn't have control of the narrative at this time. And so there was a lot of interesting tidbits that originally came out that disappeared from the lexicon, the conversation. Federal agents actually started Canada took all of its radiation equipment off the west coast and moved it to the interior of British Columbia. Federal agencies are beefing up their radiation monitoring capabilities at home and abroad, even as they insist a significant amount of fallout won't waft, that's an interesting word, from Japan onto the U.S. territories. Now, I spent the first 40 minutes showing you that simply wasn't true, right? The first 40 minutes of this video, which I'm happy now we made it past that, or almost at an hour, and getting pretty short. Environmental Protection Agency said it's adding 7 monitors in Alaska, Hawaii, and Guam. In Hawaii, they actually fed the cows and goats in that boron because they acknowledged the same thing with the fresh milk was something like 2 liters of it was what they call a yearly dose. Well, there's no such thing as a yearly dose of anthropogenic man radiation. They had conflated natural, harmless, stupid stuff like potassium and magnesium and iron and carbon and assigned it some of these anthropogenic man-made properties, which wasn't is not science, right? You can't conflate man-made with natural stuff. And this is what they constantly have done for 80 years. So it's considered accepted science, but it's not science, right? It's not. You can't build a nuclear bomb out of bananas and potato chips. But that's what they want you to conflate it and compare it with. Which operates 100 air sniffing stations. Yeah, but how solid were they? Well, the rest, like I showed you what the French government found in North America was 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. These are horrific numbers. These are just, well, that stuff's not gone away. It's sequestered in all the leaves and flowers and pollen and plants. And this is why the insects has been decimated. This is why the pollinators have almost disappeared because they brought back radioactive pollen to their hives for over a decade and a half, right? So any hives that survived now are on their last legs. You sterilized the species, and what you would expect to happen has already happened. For what it's worth, the Non-Regulatory Commission called for protective action when the projected dose exceeds 10,000 microsieverts. 10 millisieverts are 50 millisieverts to the thyroid. 50,000 microsieverts to your thyroid. So they are insane people. So suggesting that radiation at the plant, the so-called damaged plant, rose as high as 400 millisieverts an hour. Like, it was over 1 million sieverts. A sievert is 1,000 millisieverts, which is 1 million microsieverts. A microsievert, think of 750 atoms. That's a good consensus. And each atom is wrecking your chromosomes, your cells, your DNA. Your body's going to try to build a tumor around every single atom. But 3 sieverts, or 3,000 millisieverts, is a lethal dose. Your organs will melt in proximity to it. So 1 million sieverts, which was acknowledged outside of Reactor 1, for instance, because you remember, number 1 blew the fuel pool right out of the buildings. The fuel has to have a lot of water, and the water has to be circulating, or you'll get that. It'll detonate, right? This is invaluable stuff, though. Usually these calculations are very specific. You have to consider particular radioisotopes. Well, if you're talking about a nuclear meltdown, there's over 1,000 isotopes. And you're talking about particulates of the fuel, and each of them are splitting atoms every second. And what that means is, if you get one of them in your body is not only under siege from that particulate, but that particulate is replicating itself every second. So every second, you're producing more white blood cells to attack the damage in the source of each of those new anthropogenic man-made isotopes that are produced through that perpetual motion machine known as a particulate, fuel fleet, so to speak. Commercial sales of Geiger counters, hot in the United States. EPA RadNet provides a much more reliable read when it comes to detecting radioactive fallout. Yeah, if they were used appropriately. Like you funded them, you gave them the equipment, you gave them the authority, you gave them the monitor, you educated them, you gave them pensions and bursaries for their education and their children's education and their health care too. And when it finally happened, they betrayed you. They sold you out. They turned their backs on you and by proxy everybody else in every species. They're nothing to be proud of. They need to be replaced in the entirety. The law can't go away until you replace the entirety of the people that work in that industry. They all have to be dealt with. And then, of course, because the whole government agencies and everything else is so corrupt, there's little realistic possibilities of that happening unless it's ordered from a very unlikely source, right? If it ever comes across the Pacific, well, these are crazy assertions to suggest if it ever comes across the Pacific. By the way, the radiation measurements for Japan are widely available via this webpage. I clicked on it, of course, it's no connection. By clicking through the online database, of course, not found. Or reviewing a quarterly data journal. Sorry, that webpage does not exist. And I'm a sucker for those links, right? I like nothing better than going and finding a whole horde of documentation. Air monitoring equipment on the aircraft carrier USS George Washington. Your connection is not private. On another carrier, USS Ronald Reagan, 17 helicopter crew members had to be decontaminated with soap and water. And I'm not laughing, that's the gallows laugh. You can't decontaminate them. Yeah, you can get some of it off them, absolutely. It's the right thing to do, absolutely. But you're also making it possible for them to be absorbing the isotopes now with the water through their skin. You got no choice but to try your best, obviously, right? After returning from search and rescue. They actually changed, I think it was a dozen or more helicopter engines because they were so radioactive. It sucked in so much high-level radioactive particulates. They were packaged up and shipped to Hanford, I believe. Potassium iodine pills can guard against the uptake of the iodine. Yeah, but there's not just iodines. There's all kinds of gammas. You can't just say iodine. Iodine doesn't... Yeah, it took me 2 weeks to get back from shoveling my driveway. Yeah, Jeremy, I got the joke, man. That was a good one. It's going to take a lot longer, unfortunately. Well, potassium, you got to take it a couple of days before you're exposed to anthropogenic man-made radiation. It's still going to go in your body. It's still going to sequester in your muscles, your organs, and it's not going to be traveling by itself. It doesn't need to be in your thyroid to have catastrophic attributes to all of your glands. It just needs to be in your body, right? It's a very energetic, and it's not just, of course, if you got iodine-131, then you got absurd isotopes. Given the distance from Japan to the United States, it is a given that there will be no effect. Well, of course, that's absurd to suggest. And the NRC used a limit of 1 rem, 10 millisieverts, dose limit to the whole body to recommend evacuation. That doesn't mean that that's smart or that's appropriate. That's the opposite of appropriate. It's highly unlikely radiation can reach the United States from Japan and result in this type of exposure. More on a disaster in Japan. If there's a nuclear meltdown, then what? Well, we launched our own research expeditions, and the species to your left are exterminated. I'll just give you a quick, as usual, introduction to some of that. This was about 10 miles from Alaska. I'm hid away behind Ivory Island. There's Ivory Island in the front of me, and there's another island behind me. There's 27,000 islands on that coast. And a lot of people don't appreciate the enormity of the reality of research, of field studies, of boots on the ground. And poop on the ground, I meant to say. The starfish I did find were all severely deformed, including Zoe. She was really something, man. But all the starfish I did find were not starfish anymore. We don't know what they are. It's like we went into a different dimension or a different time zone. And so when you look at me on these beaches, these naked beaches, you got to realize what those beaches should be looking like. I'll show you that coming up in a moment. But on the outside, I couldn't get out there because this is the outside. So we go and hide behind it. So right around the corner, where I'm to right there, that's what it looks like. And just to get out to the beach, I had to go through heavy swells. Those little Zodiacs are fantastic, right? That was a brand new 8 horsepower Yamaha. And the idea was you needed something that you can trust, right? And then that thing only burnt 2.5 gallons a week or so. Where the big boat burns 9 gallons or 12 gallons an hour. The sea anemones, they're very, very, very unusual to see the sea anemones. And the only time I ever seen the sea anemones were in the most open and extreme parts of the coastlines. And it wasn't very often. These were the giant sea plume anemones. They come in white, brown, and green. They're usually up about 2 feet. So unless that's a gigantic mutated starfish, which is not, it's a mutated one, but it's not a gigantic one. These are all very, very tiny. And the reason I took the pictures was it was so extraordinary to find that there should be around 84 species of those plumes. Sea anemones, right? There should be 600 algae. This was an unusual to find this many algae, and there should be around 700, and that 700 algae is around 5,500 invertebrates without the backbones, like little shrimp. So up here, I think I found 6 algae total, instead of close to 700. You're seeing bull kelp, you're seeing just a couple of algae, and then you're seeing seagrass. And it was unusual to see seagrass, and the seagrass wasn't very healthy. All this algae was gone within a couple of years of that particular research expedition. These expeditions typically lasted 4 to 5 months at a time. And so I just go up and beat the crap out of myself from morning till night. And done the entire coast. Now, so to your left is what the species would normally look like. What they looked like in 2011, before Fukushima happened, is to your left after Fukushima, to your right. And so the reason of going back for almost 6 years was to see if the species to your left recovered. And he didn't. And then I should have never done it as long as I did, but I felt I needed to quantify that in order to have the urgency now, right? Because you can't deny, I can't deny it. I can't escape this. And on top of that, right, I show these pictures quite often. So you can never escape those research expeditions, right, that haunt you. Species are gone, they didn't recover. Reactor team let pressure soar. Well, they didn't let the pressure soar. They had no way to get the system to work, right? The tsunami ran through the site. It wiped out all the infrastructure. So even if the generators didn't get destroyed by the tsunami, which it did, you still took out all the infrastructure, so you still wouldn't have had power. And the minute one of the reactors blew up, you could never get close to the other buildings. So that assertion up there on April 23rd, 2011, they didn't let the pressure, they had no choice. They ran away. Right? Reactor 1 exploded within about 36 hours. That was the end of it. You can't go back there now. And the fuel pool, too, right? They lost the entire inventory. So you had 9 reactor cores or so released into your immediate environment in a most catastrophic way imaginable. My heart goes out to all the cyclone victims, the typhoons and the hurricane victims. We've covered a lot of it over the years. Now we're seeing almost every storm, like any cyclones or typhoons or hurricanes, are always at sustained winds where the building codes don't exist for those types of winds. And Madagascar's cyclone now is headed over to the coast. Wind gusts of 170 miles per hour, basic, 167 miles per hour. These are absurd numbers. Like your house, my house, your home, my home, your businesses are not able to withstand 120 mile per hour winds. 170 mile per hour gust, again, they're downplaying that. They have sustained winds of 155, 50, I think it was 154, because now it's a whole different level of a hurricane if you say 155, right? Let's keep it rolling for a while. Erie Ghost Town near Fukushima. So if your power plant, if your coal plant, your oil plant, your gas plant, your geothermal, your solar plants break down, do you have to abandon your homes, your graveyards, your restaurants, your supermarkets, your malls, your schools, your universities, your hospitals forever? That should, right off the bat, should terrify you that these facilities in your countries are, first after, all the fuel that goes into the pool is no longer in a containment. All the reactor cores are still splitting atoms for millions of homes, but there's no containment, and they're not producing power, so the atoms are released directly into your environment. And this is why almost every single nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms, as far as you can see, from a satellite even. Japanese nuclear power companies are so leery of releasing radiation to the atmosphere. They're not leery of it, they can't contain it. The buildings blew up, for goodness sakes. That their rules call for waiting much longer and obtaining many more sign-offs than the U.S. counterparts before venting the potentially dangerous steam that builds up. Dangerous steam? Right? So Wall Street Journal inquiry found they refused to acknowledge that the reactors blew up. They refused to acknowledge that there was any meltdowns. So these are the worst humans conceivable, and they always bring in these guest writers for those types of stories, which is typically will be connected directly back to the International Atomic Energy Agency, ERPA, UNSCLEAR, the IAEA, etc., right? It's a big, there's 100 of them, and they're on all the same committees. It's the same 100. They're making the policies and decisions for your schools and your universities and your communities, and they're based upon an agenda. They're not based upon the science. It's based upon what can they trick you into being complacent with, and then quantify that as some kind of a safe level or something. Remember, the International Atomic Energy Agency is not a regulatory agency. Neither is UNSCLEAR or IRPA, the IPRC, etc., etc. You go read this story. You'll see it in a lot of the International Atomic Energy Agency stories. And this was 2023. Anna Clark, IAEA, is not a regulatory agency, so they're not in a position to judge or approve Japan's soil recycling, Japan's water releases, Japan's fuel, Japan's reactors, Japan nuclear power plants, nuclear anything. They're not a regulatory agency. They're put on a pedestal because they're the military-industrial complex. Japan has raised the accident level. This is April the 12th. From 5 to 7. It's like you had 4 reactor buildings detonate. You had 8 fuel pools on top of that detonate. You ejected the reactor cores and the fuel pools. Chernobyl was a single reactor. It was a new reactor. It was a small reactor. It was a graphite reactor. These reactors are 30 years old. They had decades of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings on top of that. And that's what you're seeing in Reactor 3, right? Send us people that don't mind dying. Do you think they're asking for TEPCO employees or nuclear scientists and nuclear academics who are going to apply for that job? And so to suggest that the amount of radiation and suggest that is leaking, suggest that that is a leak, is about 10% of what Chernobyl. So their assertions are based upon a blatant lie, a blatant misrepresentation of facts, and purposely meant to perpetrate or to protect the industry and throw you under the bus. And this is the perpetually evil DW media. An unnamed official said on TV, got an unnamed official on TV, really, and subject to finalization by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the International Atomic Energy Agency is not a regulatory agency. They're not a regular, not in a position to judge or approve anything. Right, but they're put on a pedestal as if they're somehow the authority. Why would you need a foreign entity with a dubious legacy dictating the policies in your sovereign country? Well, what's the point of that again? What are you going to gain? What is your country going to benefit by having an entity that has no accountability, that's not elected, is not appointed, it is part of a military-industrial complex of 195 militaries? And NISA, of course, which is the Japanese version of the NRA. Fire discovered earlier. They operated a crippled plant. This is in April, this story. April 12th, right? This is long after all the reactors have already lost their inventories. That his workers had found and rapidly extinguished a small fire near a reactor building. They ran right over there and stomped it out, boys. It's absurd to suggest that they found a small fire near one of the buildings and then put it out. Your organs melt in that proximity, right? So the fire was discovered at Tokyo Electric Power Company, which should have been on trial for crimes against humanity, and extinguished it several minutes later. Engineers at Fukushima have been pumping water into several reactors. How does that actually work, I wonder? Let me show you some pictures. Maybe that'll make no sense for you unless I show you some pictures. So engineers, which are never going to go to Fukushima, have been pumping water into several reactors. So how are you going to pump water into that reactor? It's like having a bonfire, and then the next morning, when the fire is out, going over and pissing on it. It's irrelevant, right? So how are you going to put water into these buildings? What's the purpose when they've lost their entire inventories, which were at the top of the buildings, and that being in proximity to it means your organs are going to melt? So reactor 4, there's 4 sides of reactor 4. That's pretty blatant. These were 190-foot tall buildings, 65 meters, 190 feet tall, 150 feet wide. And so think of that building you're looking at is 150 feet wide. It's just totally, the building is missing. It's just a stump there. And all the inventories, around 9 reactor cores were at the top of the buildings. Everything has to be transferred underwater. So the fuel pool and the reactor core is at the top of the building. And when there's no top of the building, then the story, because people don't know the design of a nuclear plant, and that the industry is counting on that. They're 100% counting on that nobody's going to understand. It's really something. When you look at Arnie Gunnarsson and Helen Caldicott, Christopher Busby, who were all put on a pedestal on, say, YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and all your favorite alternative media was interviewing them instead of me. And their job was to come out and lull you into, make you sit in the fire until it was too late to escape it. So the equivalent of 3 Mile Island in March, a level 5, when you had each reactor core is a level 7, right, which is a stupid, idiotic number to use, because most people get confused by simple stuff, right? You had 36 reactor cores melt down. Each of them were hundreds of times a 3 Mile Island, because these reactors were massive reactors, pure uranium, pure plutonium. Equivalent 3 Mile Island. Prime Minister declared a nuclear power emergency on that Friday. Usually occurs if there's confirmation of radioactive leaks from a nuclear power plant, leaks, or a reactor cooling system breaks down, but did not initially seem to be the case. And this story is on March 11th, March 11th, 2011. So it was the next day, right? So Idano, who, by his own words, said he never slept for 72 hours. He's just done interviews where he said there is no releases, there is no event. He told her even when the reactors blew up, and that showed up on public television worldwide, he still stood there and said there is no release. The UN said that the 4 nuclear power plants closest to the epicenter have been safely shut down. Simply wasn't true. Safely shut down takes several days. Fire brigades had to be especially effective in putting out the blaze at a power plant. Fire brigades don't know what a nuclear reactor is. 2,000 residents surrounding areas were told to evacuate their homes. If you shut down a reactor, still a lot of heat in the fuel and requires several hours of active cooling, Greenpeace said. Where's Greenpeace? Greenpeace blocked me from all of their Twitter accounts. Greenpeace Canada, Greenpeace United States, Greenpeace International, Greenpeace UK, Greenpeace New Zealand, Greenpeace Australia. Need a lot of water to take the heat out of the reactor. Need 4,500 tons a minute. Need 6,450,000 one-ton pickup trucks every 24 hours. 6,450,000 one-ton pickup trucks with 1,000 liters in the back of them, 2,200 pounds of water in the back of each of them, is a row of traffic around the entire planet more than once. That's how much water a nuclear plant needs each day. Otherwise, it heats up and then it goes bang, like you've seen it go. A blaze at the Tohoku Electric Disease Factory, Onagawa nuclear plant. It could potentially be a problem depending on where it was occurring, how long it would take the fire brigade to extinguish it. The fire brigade is the last people you want to send into a nuclear event. They don't know what they're doing. They can make it worse. You need to send in, you need to sacrifice at least, ideally you should sacrifice a couple of million nuclear scientists. Nothing personal against nuclear scientists, but they're the better ones for the job. And if we kill a couple of million of them trying to stop a nuclear meltdown, that would have been a moral and ethical thing to do, right? That should have been the Fukushima 2 million nuclear scientists instead of Fukushima 50 homeless. And there's around 4,000 teams of Fukushima 50s. They were all homeless people, destitute, and the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language. They were sacrificed so the industry could look and pretend it had some redeeming qualities. He said it was logical that the fire had broken out in the turbine hall because a lot of oil that is combustible is not close to the reactor itself, so there's no immediate risk. The fire in the turbine buildings, which are on the seaside of the reactors, the reactor inventories are in assemblies. So assembly hall has 100 fuel rods, nuclear fuel rods in it, and each fuel rod is 12 feet long and 18 pounds. So each assembly is around 1,800 pounds. And so they were turned into projectiles. They actually penetrated the building, the turbine buildings themselves from the detonation. So suggesting that there was no fire at reactor 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 is just unconscionable. But that's what your loving journalists and media had done to you, right? They all done that to you. Later media reports said that the fire had been extinguished. Oh yeah, looks like that was extinguished. How are you going to extinguish a nuclear meltdown? How does that actually work? Anybody know? That person should become a professor at stupid lives here university. The troubled past of Fukushima had a stricken nuclear plant failed safety checks, crammed its buildings with more uranium they could stand. We're not going to make it through that tonight. I don't think it's a long story. American engineers who masterminded the building have not intended for spent fuel to be housed inside the flimsy shells of the reactor buildings. And then they show you that picture. So that kind of quantifies that assertion, right? That's a pretty flimsy shell. It feels good to get back here and punch out a show anyway, right? Gotta like that. Excuse me. I know we started a little early tonight because I didn't think I would last this long at the rate I was going down. So it's 10:46. I usually start at 10 o'clock, right? We punched out an hour and a half at this stage. I'm not going to push my luck any further. I don't think it's appropriate for me. And shout out to Tabitha donated 360. And Colette donated 400, which was just an incredibly timing, appropriate timing, because I'm having a hard time taking care of myself. That changed the game for me big time, so enormously thankful and grateful that you done it at that time, right? It was just, couldn't have been better timing for me. And I still got a ways to go, you know. I hurt myself really. I really done myself in, eh? It was nasty. So at least I'm fairly functional, but I'm not functional, right, per se. But at least I'm back in the game, so it makes me feel like at least I accomplished something. Hopefully that'll pick up my spirit over the next number of days. Well, I know it will, actually. And I'm pretty sure right now, so I'm going to give it up. Tonight. Not push my luck any further than I already have. And play nuclear exceptionalism, I think. I know James has posted a number of shows. Another whale found in Virginia. I probably got that in my pile if I remember correctly. There was one in Oregon a few days back, a 46-foot fin whale that I got. I'm not really working on stuff right now. I had some folders ready to go, so I do kind of, I put a show together, a small show, which normally I can do a show a day. But I had a single show put together of really important stuff. We got an awful lot of sea life to get through. If you're not familiar, go to my live and also check out my playlist of species affected by the radioactive fallout, and you'll find just an absurd amount of material. But we've covered 8, I think it's 8, presentations on just emaciated whales worldwide. It's a brutal eye-opener. And what makes it really interesting is the media, is trying to downplay it and everything else, but nobody is reporting, giving it context the prominence that it deserves, right? And I put out 8 videos, and that warrants all the media having a conversation that all the whales are showing up emaciated worldwide. You can't blame every whale death, and you can't insinuate that all whales are dying of ship strikes when they're all dying from starvation. And we're talking catastrophics. It's a complicated story, and we've been glued to it for a long time. So we're pretty good at telling the story. And I'll catch everybody in the next one. I'm so stiff now, I barely move. This is called nuclear exceptionalism. And you'll find it over on James Lucid's site on YouTube. It was up at 16,400 subscribers. Wow. That's so awesome. This is called nuclear exceptionalism. And we'll see everybody on the next show. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Take care, everyone.
They said it was clean, too cheap to meter. Built the dome, then cooked the beaker. Said the rod was safe as sealed in drums. but left them leaking out of Idaho slums. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. They chase the sun, all fusion proud. Ignore the barrels stacked in clouds. Promise stars in every socket, while curium settled in the market. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. Chart is clean, while whales rolled up beside the submarine. Blame the algae, blame the rain, but never trace the gamma chain. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. Now the rods are rusting, the record spins. Mama warned them, too many sins. Keep your sun, keep your lab coat pride, till you fix the waste you tried to hide.